Tom Howell-Jones of Aberdare, international raider, fighting for the Republic in Spain, writes home to his mother, "Here's a Spanish dish. Fry some sliced potatoes. When done, whisk some eggs in a dish and pour on the potatoes to make a pancake. Here it's called a tortilla. You must try one and think of me." It was late spring 1938. Soon, with the rest of what remained of the Welsh volunteers in Spain, Tom Howell-Jones was going to be here in the valley of the River Ebro. There were going to be 16,000 Nazi soldiers on the Franco side. The Battle of the Ebro was going to be the turning point of the Spanish Civil War.
In the spring of '38, the position of the Republic became desperate. The fascists opened an Aragon offensive coming down the Ebro Valley with about 250,000 Italian, German, Moroccan and Spanish troops. Their planes were everywhere. They had hundreds of tanks, thousands of guns, and the Republican troops and the British battalion retreated from Belchite to Caspi right down to Bataya. I can still remember the iron-hard roads in the nights and the moonlit nights and the piercing wind as we marched from position to position.
The Spanish communist orator La Pasionaria had cried, "Better to die on your feet than to live on your knees." Now, as the third year of the war began, more and more Republicans were testing her words. Tommy Adlam, Tom Pentre.
I was the only foreigner there, and 3 Spaniards were in this bit of a hole. And we go see the tanks going up over, just above our heads. So one of these Spaniards has a white towel around his neck. So all of a sudden he started waving the towel. So I turned around and grabbed him. I went to hit him. I said, "Do you surrender?" And he said, "Mr. Reba, look up." And there was an Italian sitting behind a machine gun trying to fire down on us, and his machine gun was jammed. So here it is. I got up, and these Spaniards walked ahead of me. I stayed there, and I thought, I'd go back this way if I can. So some of they go, you know, instead of coming this way, they do come. I said, "Thank you very much, so long." And I turned to go. And they said, no, arriba, up. So I had to go, give myself up then. So we walked us down the road a couple of yards, and an Italian officer came up. And he asked these 3 boys what nationality they were, and they said Spaniards. And though I had my cap on with a Red Cross badge in it, turned to me, he said, "National?" I said, "English," because we were all English according to them. I said, "English." And he had a revolver in his hand, and lifted up his revolver, pointed it to my head, and I put my hand up, and he fired, and he went down. And I thought, what I want to see won't hurt so much, like. So I was on the floor, and I thought I was there for a lifetime, waiting for that bullet. But I heard tanks coming. So I thought, oh, well, it's better to get up and have one bullet and finish it than perhaps a tank. So I put on a hat, you know, life is precious after all. I put on a hat as if I'd fainted. And I shook my head and lifted my head up, and I could see a pair of bullets staring me in the face and a revolver in somebody's hand. So I thought, oh, here it is, you don't go on down. So I got up and put my hands up, I said, "Shoot to hell with it." So a motorbike pulled up there, and he asked, Italian it was, and he asked this other Italian who I was, and he said, Republican. He said, "Death." Oh, thank you very much. So he made me get up then, and he made me hand my personal stuff over. He took me a couple of yards down the road, and there was some Italian officer, and he looked somebody really high to me. And he asked me, could I speak Spanish? I said, "Poco." on English. Oh, you speak English, can you? He said, in perfect English. I said, yes. He said, what brigade do you belong to? Oh, not giving nothing away. Oh, I'm attached to the medical. I said, yes, but you've got to be attached to some brigade, he said, a company. Oh, I said, international brigade. So you're English, he said. I said, no, I'm Welsh. I thought if they're going to shoot me for being an Englishman, well, I stand a better chance for being Welsh. So he Welsh. I couldn't understand that. So I was trying to describe to him then. I said, Britain? See? Scotia? See? I said, Inglaterra? You see? I said, Skerda, the left. I said, Wales. Ah, comprendi, he said. Galles. So that's the first time I knew they called it Wales Galles in their language.
Early on in the war, prisoners on both sides had been shot out of hand. The question of prisoners and of the particularly black ferocity of the fighting is recalled by Frank Thomas of Cardiff, who fought in the Spanish Foreign Legion on the Franco side.
We had the Moors fighting for us, of course, and I mean the things that they did were nothing to be proud of, because the Moors were, well, shall we say, an uncivilized people as far as European civilization was thought of. They used to catch their prisoners, they used to torture them and kill them. At least with our prisoners we did shoot them. But on both sides at the beginning of that war, neither side took prisoners. And particularly if the Legion were captured, legionnaires were captured, you could count on not being killed instantly. You're very lucky if you died very quickly. Very lucky. As a matter of fact, we all carried one spare bullet. This was issued to you when you joined the Legion, and that bullet was for yourself. If you were taken prisoner, more damn fool you. Things did improve vastly once the International Brigade came. I'm sure they don't realize how bloody that war was from the beginning of it for the first 3 or 4 or 5 months. Because after all, they never came there until November, December. And by that, once they came, well, we did start getting some sort of rule about prisoners and the way things should be conducted.
If prisoners of war are taken, obviously an army must be advancing. They can't be taken when an army is on the defensive and retreating. The only periods that I can recall where the Republican army was advancing was, as I've already said, in Brunetti, and later in September in the region of Belchite, Quinto. They did make some progress, captured some little hills actually, and I remember when I went up, because the battalion commander had been killed, a man named Peter Daly, who had one time worked in the Colliers in Gorsainon, and we had to get another battalion commander appointed. I went over this hill, and it was quite clear that the fascist armies had been there for a very long time. They had dugouts there. There was evidence too of some ladies' clothing in some of the dugouts as well, so they must have been well entertained during the stalemate situation that existed previously. And corpses, bloated and black, lying about on the hill, you know. And when we got to the actual front, the Moors were on the opposite side in the trenches there, because they had already dug in by the time I got up. And what was really eerie and to some extent frightening was the sort of wailing that came from the Moorish trenches, especially when the moon came up, sort of banshee wailing, you know, rather, I suppose, part of their attitude to the moon or whatever, I don't know. But it was really an eerie experience to hear.
It sounds like Allah, Yalla, and it's a horrible scream. When we was in the trenches, these young Spaniards who were lying by the side of me before I could distinguish any sound, they'd hear it and they were away. A horrible scream. But most people do this when they're going over the trenches. You would scream, and it's a horrible sensation when you jump over the trench into what you think is certain death.
There were various stories that if the Moors caught any of us, they would castrate us, they would do everything but treat us as human beings. And that seemed to be a reason. Whether it was true or not, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know.
The Moors on his side or not, it had long since come home to one of the men on the Franco side that whatever romance he had seen in the Spanish Foreign Legion was, like many of his comrades, dead.
All the old foreign veterans, or nearly all of them, had gone. And the recruits we were getting all the time now were mainly Spaniards. Things weren't the same, the Legion wasn't the same. There was a lot of anti-British feeling in the press because of the non-intervention policy. I was getting battle happy. I'd been very badly wounded. I was in the hospital, and if my luck held, it was going to go on possibly for years. And I began to feel I had no political stake in this.
Ian O'Duffy, who back in 1934 had founded the Irish Fascist Party and who commanded 600 Irishmen opposed to the Republic, now took a hand in Frank Thomas's affairs.
At that particular time, the Irish battalion came back into Talavera, and talking to some of the Irishmen, I began to realize I could actually find a way home. They introduced me to General O'Duffy, who was the commander of the Irish battalion, and with his help and his advice, it was decided I should proceed out of Spain with them under his wing, shall we say, and this is how I got out of Spain, under the seat of a railway carriage with the Irish battalion, through General O'Duffy's own help and Major O'Sullivan's. It was in point of fact desertion. I admit it was desertion, but even now, 40 years after, I still think I was thoroughly justified. I'd given 8 months to Spain. I'd fought in various campaigns. I'd been badly wounded. There were quite a lot of reasons why I still feel absolutely justified.
But on again to 1938. For those on the side of the Republic and who had managed to survive, it wasn't such a short war.
About the end of March, we were in a village called Corbera in the Ebro Bend, and we were awakened, and a small detachment of 20 men under our Lieutenant Morris Davis of Quaker's Yard, we marched to Villalba nearer the front. All day we waited for the fascists to come, but instead the peasants and their carts came. But we could hear heavy fighting just over the ridge. We were getting worried at night, as night came, because we had no contract. Then Walter Gregory, Lieutenant Walter Gregory, appeared on his motorbike and said, "The British battalion has been smashed this morning outside Calathetti." This was where, of course, Murray and Morgan got captured.
4 of us were carrying a stretcher with a wounded man in it. And then we could hear in the distance the sound of approaching planes. And with a combination of heat and tiredness and lack of food and the fighting all the morning, we were almost in a sort of trance-like state, sort of divorced from reality. All the sounds now became muffled, and we weren't always too clear in our minds what we were seeing. And instead of looking upon these planes who were going to strafe us according to the new German technique, we saw them as something rather lovely flying in the sky. And they swooped down almost as graceful as birds. And you could see coming from the cockpit where the gunner was, these long lines of flashing lights, which were the bullets, and little spurts of dust all along the olive grove where we were and where he was trying to hit us. And then it would swoop out beyond us. We carry on a few more yards with a wounded man. Then they return again. And funnily enough, at no time did you feel a sense of enmity towards these planes. It's a strange feeling. We couldn't have been in our right minds, I think. But later on we realized we had to take some sort of defense, and then we started firing back at the planes with our rifles, and this achieved the aim of getting rid of them. But this was a technique used then in the Second World War, because the Germans practiced all the techniques in Spain for years. And I'm quite convinced myself that had they wished to, they could have finished the war in a very, very short space of time indeed. They developed strafing, they developed the blitzkrieg, they developed the panzer attacks, they had developed a technique of shelling first, then the planes would come over, then finally the men would come on the tanks and armoured cars and merely take over after the battle was won.
At this time, I was in a Spanish unit belonging to the 15th Army Corps, and it was a special unit with heavy machine guns. We'd managed to get them from somewhere, and they formed this special battalion, and it was at the disposal of the 15th Army Corps. So we'd come from one front and we were sent to another one by night along the River Ebro somewhere, by Gandesa, I think. We'd been there about 2 or 3 days. We'd deepened the trenches and made our place better for defending, and then the enemy attacked in a big way. We were bombed, strafed and shelled. The enemy started attacking on about the 3rd day in droves. But we had our machine guns ready waiting, and we must have destroyed hundreds of them with our heavy machine guns. I was sick of seeing people falling as a result of our firing. And we didn't know much about the troops on our right nor on our left. And the battle had been going on for most of the day. It was still daylight, but somebody came along the trench and said that the enemy had broken through on our right flank, and that the enemy was in the trench coming down and shooting.
Most of the battalion of 500 men had retreated, leaving the machine gun company only to hold the post. Well, finally we got together, about 20 of us, and then we started wandering over the hills. Well, we had with us this wounded man, and he was a problem. It's very difficult carrying a wounded man at night time. You couldn't see the paths, the tracks, you were falling down cliffs, and we knew if you carried him in the daytime, we'd be easily detected. So we held a meeting and decided that there's only one thing to be done, that is to put it to this man Morgan Havard from Swansea, put our predicament to him, and that we felt that the only solution was to sacrifice one man rather than sacrifice the whole 20 of us. Well, he wholeheartedly endorsed the whole idea that he should be left. So we left him by a roadside with cigarettes under a tree in the hope that some passing farmers would find him.
So we were running short of ammunition. We were short of machine gun ammunition and short of hand grenades. Anyhow, we fired away, and then the next thing we knew that the troops were behind us, and they were throwing hand grenades into our trench from behind now, and they were still coming up in the front. So anyhow, we'd finished our ammunition, and that was that. So we put our hands up and said, prisoners of war. They immediately mowed us down with submachine guns. They had, I don't know what make they were, but they were machine guns of some type, and threw hand grenades into the trenches. And as far as I went down, with a bullet in my thumb and 1 or 2 in the leg, and half the muscle of my right arm was gone with a piece of hand grenade. So anyway, after they'd done their job, they left the area.
The terrain was exceedingly difficult, and after a couple of nights, my tonsillitis came on again, and I dropped out, and I slept like a log all night long on the mountain top without feeling any cold at all. This time I saw because I was more or less unconscious with tiredness. Well, then I wandered over the hills in the right direction, I hoped, for day after day after day. And during this time I was unable to find any food at all, because on the mountains were no houses, an occasional shed or 2 in the olive groves. Well, after some time I became very much like the prophets in the Old Testament, went out in the hot deserts, and they fasted for so many nights and days, and then they saw visions and dreamed dreams. And I think very much the same thing must have happened to me. I remember on one occasion walking down the side of a hill, and as I looked down I could see a whitewashed farm surrounded by a paling, and I could hear a dog barking inside the farm. And as I walked down I could hear some shooting coming from behind me, quite without danger, because it was a spent bullet. You get it from the sound, shoot, shoot like that, and I knew it wouldn't harm me. But when I got to the bottom of the hill, the farm had disappeared. So I walked back up again, saw the farm once more, came down and lost it once more. I did this a third time, and then I knew then is the effect of hunger upon my brain.
I sat up to see what was wrong with me, and blood was flowing out of my arm. I tried to do something about that with the other arm. And then I thought, well, I'll be captured, because obviously now the enemy was advancing. So I took the stuff out of my pocket in my left hand and buried it, because I had some documents that they shouldn't see. And but next to me, another fellow disturbed me. He was an American Jew by the name of Joe Kleinman from New York. And he had been wounded in the chest pretty badly. And anyway, he managed to sit up and smile at me and ask me for a cigarette. I didn't have any. But I went through the pockets of one or two of the others nearby, and I managed to get one or two cigarettes out of their pockets. And I lit a cigarette for him. And he asked me for my handkerchief to stop the blood coming from his chest. Well, I gave it. It was a dirty one anyhow. And the blood was streaming out of his chest. And he said, well, Tom, I think I've had it, he said. And we'd been together for some time. And it's been nice knowing you, he said. And he smoked a bit on his cigarette. So long, he said. And with a smile on his face, he died.
When I saw a group of men with their horses at the bottom of the hill near a stream, I realized that they need not be my own side, they could be the other side, the Franquists. So I approached very, very carefully through the undergrowth until I came near, and I heard them speaking a sort of Spanish, broken Spanish between them. So when I heard them speak Spanish, I knew they were probably on our side, especially since it wasn't good Spanish. So I got out and I asked the bloke there, would he give me a light for my cigarette, which he did. We chatted a little bit in broken Spanish, and we went to the campfire, and I had another smoke, and they gave me some food. And then they put some more logs in the fire, and then they realized that the star I was wearing was a 5-pointed star, and theirs was a 6-pointed star. They were Italians, and they realized I belonged to the International Brigade, and they just caught me, and I was captured.
The Battle of the Ebro, that was a turning point as far as members of the International Brigade were concerned, because at that time there were more Spaniards being thrown into the brigades were being diluted, were really being diluted. For example, the British battalion had 2 Spanish companies. The American Washington Battalion had 3 Spanish companies. Now, this is the first time that I was with the English battalion. All the war up until now, I've been with the German battalions, I've been with American battalions. The Battle of the Ebro was my first experience with the British battalions.
On the 25th of July, 1938, we crossed the Ebro, an offensive. We crossed at dawn in boats. And in spite of terrible bombing and strafing by the fascist planes, we advanced almost to the edge of Gandesa. There was heavy fighting around Corbera and around a hill called 481, where the British battalion suffered serious losses. Lewis Clive and Hayden Guest and a number of the best men fell there, and it went on for 12 days of absolute torture until we were withdrawn. When we come out, the usual procedure went. We had our mail, we had our newspapers, and we arrested and recovered from the terrible battering we had. Then after about 10 days in reserve, we went to the Sierra Pandols, a limestone ridge about 2,000 feet high with absolutely precipitous faces.
Sierra Pandols, now that was a very nasty place, solid granite. And we were holding this ridge against the Moroccan troops, Moorish troops there for 3 to 4 weeks. And there we couldn't build trenches because it was solid granite. All we could do was have big stone and try to build some sort of a parapet with no sandbags, no anything. The battalion were many times told to advance. It was an impossible situation. You can't advance on top of hills and down dales with terrible bombardments going on.
I was in a big crack with 2 of my observers. There we could look down 700 or 800 feet into the gorge, and we could look right across that sector of the battlefield, right across to the pontoon bridges on the Ebro, right on to Bataya, and we could see everything happening. There, all night we were fired at, and then at dawn we heard a thunderous roar. We knew what was coming. We looked out, We peeped out of the crack, and there, about 1,500 feet in the air, were 150 Italian bombers, surrounded by 100 Italian fighters. We watched in agonizing suspense, and then they dropped their stuff. The bombs came down like 1,000 express trains, spreading dust and stones and red-hot shrapnel everywhere. As soon as they had gone, another 150 came, and it went like that all day long until the mountain was marked with shrapnel everywhere. In addition to that, we were mortared in regular sequence. First, the Americans got it, then they shifted to the Canadians, then they shifted to the Cubans, then they came to the British, and the Italians on the neighboring ridges of the Pandols showered us with these mortars. It was absolutely terrifying, and those paths of the Sierra Pandols were covered all day by wounded men struggling down on their own or being carried down in stretchers. It was a real slaughterhouse. I can remember about the 24th of August, 1938, I got my weekly Aberdare Leader and some mail from home. I read it in the intervals of the bombing. Then I crawled up to where Tom Howell-Jones from Aberdare was in a stone crevice. I said, "Here's the Aberdare Leader, Tom." Then I got back to my place straight away. An hour later, there was terrible mortaring of the upper ridges of the battalion area. There was a lot of shouting, and they came and said, "Quick, your mate has had it." And I rushed up, and there Tom Howell-Jones and his mates had been killed instantly. And the leader lay there, blood-stained in the trench.
Tom Howell-Jones. Whisk some eggs and pour on the fried potatoes he had written to his mother, giving her the recipe for tortilla. You must try one, and think of me. 4 weeks after his death, with the battle still raging, the orator La Pasionaria addressed the international brigaders as they were being withdrawn from Spain. "Many thousands of you," she said, "are staying here with the Spanish earth for a shroud. To the living," she said, "you are history, you are legend. You can go proudly." But some are not yet free to go.
Up until this time, all prisoners had been shot out of hand on the battle line. But this time, Franco had decided that he was going to win the war very quickly, and he wanted to have all the international brigaders as showpieces for propaganda purposes. So I was very, very glad indeed to be taken a prisoner. We were taken to an old monastery called San Pedro de Cardenia near Burgos. The conditions there were frankly appalling.
And to San Pedro too was to come Morgan Harvard of Swansea, whom they'd left wounded by the roadside.